Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. Jack Stern here with you, coming to you from Brewer Fanatic every week to recap all things Brewers. Spencer Michaelis is lame and not properly dedicated to the pod, so we had to dip into the guest pool for this week. Kurt Hogue from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel joins us. You can find his work at JS Online. Follow him on Twitter as well. Kurt, thank you so much for joining me on such short notice because my co-host hung me out to dry.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm more committed than Spencer Michaelis. I want you to put that word out there.
Committed. And this isn't even your show.
I was going to say, I'm not as committed as you because I did not cover the game today.
Well, that's true.
But that's true. But that's okay. I don't strive to be more committed than you.
10-game homestand. I might be the only one who's at least been there for all of them so far and will be there for all 10 of them. So we have a lot to talk about from what's transpired on this homestand so far. But we're going to shift things around a little bit, and we're going to start with some news that broke shortly after the game today. Christian Yelich announcing on his Twitter account that he's going to undergo season-ending back surgery. The Brewers were kind of trying to kick this can as far as they could by going the rest and rehab route with him, but he is now going to be out for the rest of the 2024 season. Expects to be back 100% in 2025, but we're not going to see Christian Yelich again this year. He's going to go under the knife, have back surgery. That's supposed to happen on Friday. So, Kurt, I'll kind of start with you on this. Just what do we know so far about where things are at with Yelich and kind of what the future looks like for him? And how does this impact the Brewers the rest of the way, if at all, compared to the situation that they were already in to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, right? Next year, you should be getting the version of healthy Christian Yelich we saw. You hope that the back surgery, everything goes well there. It can be sort of a finicky part of the body to begin with. Surgeries on that part of the body, kind of like the shoulder too, makes you have a couple questions. But if all goes well and they can get this thing behind them, like the version of Christian Yelich that we've seen when healthy is an elite hitter, full stop. When he was playing this year, he was one of the very best hitters in the National League, up there with the top of the top in the NL. Unfortunately, feels like the Brewers can never have a healthy roster going into October. I mean, we knew it was going to be a healthy roster to begin with, since injuries that have happened a while ago, Miley, Gasser, Woodruff, all those sorts of guys. But it seems like every single time this team is like thinking of making a deep run, something pops up, someone misses the playoffs, and it's always one of their best players too. Burns in 20, Yelich in 19, Devin Williams in 21. They didn't make the playoffs in 22, and then last year was Woodruff again. So this is an unfortunate trend for the Brewers. You can even go back to 2008 with Ben Sheets, sort of snake bit luck. But, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this too. I'm not calling it any sort of death blow to the offense. Like we've been thinking about the offense now for 3-4 weeks without him, and you kind of look at the lineup and you go, especially if you're getting the version of Jackson Chourio that you're getting, like this is a pretty okay offense that can be good, that can be really good. Lot of questions about who's going to fill in for him. It's like the same guys that are filling in, but lots of questions within those guys' offensive profiles. We saw Garrett Mitchell have a really tough homestand so far. Blake Perkins will theoretically be back pretty quickly here, and he can slot in. But like, the hope was you could stay afloat and then plug this guy back in and raise the ceiling of the offense. Now you've got these young guys with significant questions in their offensive profiles that are going to have to play every day and like play against. You're going to have lefties in there against lefties. It creates a whole bunch of questions, but not going to call it a death knell yet.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that one. What I kind of keep coming back to with this is when Yelich first hit the shelf again with the flare-up of that back injury, Pat Murphy told us shortly after that happened that you kind of do have to plan for him not coming back. You have to be prepared for it. And I think in that sense, it's just kind of a continuation of what the Brewers have already had to deal with. I don't know if it's so much a new blow. Obviously, you were holding out the hope that he was going to come back this year. But there's a sense for me, like, they had to have been prepared that this is something that was going to happen. And Murphy saying that kind of indicated that they were at least thinking about this being a possibility. And you talked about like they've already been putting up with this for about 3 weeks now. They've had to backfill him. They've done okay. What Churio's done in the meantime has obviously helped them a lot. And they got some other guys who you would hope can get hot at the right time. And maybe it's not necessarily going to be one guy. It might need to be multiple guys who come in and they each kind of have their own little stretch. We saw it from Mitchell for a little bit. He's cooled back off. Jake Bowers is still a guy who's on the roster and is a left-handed bat who's going to get some playing time. He's gotten more playing time since Yelich hit the shelf. He's got some on-base ability, some power. The consistency hasn't been there for him this year, but he's another guy who's in that mix as well. Blake Perkins, like you said, hopefully coming back soon from that calf injury, which we'll get to as we continue going through some of these injury updates. So I'm with you on that. I don't think it's a death sentence. It obviously hurts that you're not going to get him back, but it is something that the Brewers have weathered for a pretty good chunk of the season as well. Yelich has only played in 70 games this year, so they've done a decent job without him in that lineup. It's going to hurt, but I do think there is still a path for them. What I'm a little bit more concerned about is kind of what our first question of the episode is about here. Andrew asked us on Twitter, has there ever been a hitter who came back from a major back surgery to be 100%, so to speak? He says he can't think of one. And then what kind of player do you see him being next year, if at all? And I guess this is kind of what worries me a little bit because I'm not entirely sure what version of Christian Yelich we're going to see once he comes back from that back injury, because it is a serious ailment, like you talked about. It's right up there with shoulder injuries for pitchers as well. And we do kind of have a recent example of a guy who obviously didn't quite have the pedigree of Yelich, but when Jesse Winker was here, he was coming off of a back surgery. Granted, he had a couple of other ailments as well. His injury was also a little bit more to the neck area. He was coming off a knee injury, but still, this is a very important part of your body and it's central to all of your movement as a hitter and just as an athlete in general. So I am a little curious as well and a little bit concerned. I'm not expecting him to come back next year and be the guy that he was this year. I think even if he were healthy, that's still a little bit of a stretch just because he's having such a good year. But I'm kind of expecting that we're going to get at least a somewhat physically diminished version of him next year, even if he's technically 100% healthy, so to speak, after coming back from the back. Is he going to be 100% recovered in the sense that he has all of the mobility back and just in a good spot physically and in the same spot physically as he was before? I guess I'm not entirely sure that that's where he's going to be in 2025. It might take a little longer, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I don't off the top of my head, I cannot think of a ton of hitters who have undergone like major back surgery. I'm sure there's a comprehensive list somewhere. There's guys that have happened to it. The name that I think of Brooke Lopez on the Bucks. That's probably like a best case thing. He got back surgery, what, mid 30s, early 30s, probably older than Yelich is now when he got that a couple years back and came back like moving better than he had been in the last few years. So, without knowing the full scope of like how it's affected hitters, I think that's probably the optimistic angle on things. And it'll definitely be the storyline of next spring. Like, you want things to matter in spring training? Well, here you go. I've got something for you. How is Christian Yelich moving? How is he swinging the bat? How's his bat speed? How does it affect his swing? Can he still steal bases? How is he in the field? Like, all these things are going to matter a lot next spring. But it's still got a month and a half of baseball to play in a first place team playing until then.
Yeah, this is really interesting for me because it can very easily go one of two ways in terms of how his recovery goes, how he comes back. He could come back, and you talked about the Brooke Lopez example of a guy who comes back and he's moving really well. And if this works as Yelich and the Brewers seem to hope, this can hopefully be a little bit more of a long-term solution to the back ailments that have plagued him for all of these years going back to his days in Miami. So in the best case scenario, he's better in the long run after having undergone this. And then the worst case scenario, it does kind of have some lingering effects on him when he comes back. So we'll see how he looks in 2025, but that will be a very real story for spring training. Just how is he moving when we see him back on the field? You're going to hear plenty more analysis about Christian Yelich's injury. This is just the beginning, so we're not going to dive into it too much tonight. There will be more to come. We're going to talk about a couple of other quick injury updates relating to the Brewers. We mentioned Blake Perkins really quickly a couple minutes ago. He's dealing with a right calf strain. Sounds like the Brewers are hoping that that's not going to be super serious, hoping that it's going to be a short-term absence for him. Would be nice to be able to plug him back into that outfield sooner than later. Obi Milner is on the injured list right now. He's dealing with a shoulder impingement. He was part of the corresponding set of moves to bring DL Hall back to the big leagues. We'll talk about his first start in a few minutes as well. JB Bukauskas has once again had his rehab assignment put on hold. He seems to be on the DL Hall track of starting and stopping multiple times on his rehab. So he had a comebacker come and hit him in the arm during his last outing in Nashville on August 9th. And he left the game, but he actually left with an oblique injury. It had nothing to do with that comebacker. So they've shut him down. They're not really sure what the next steps are going to be for him. But kind of getting up to crunch time now as to whether or not you're going to see him again this year in the bullpen. Clock is ticking. We've only got a few weeks left in the season as we're already at the midway point in August. So that's the bad news so far for the Brewers. They do have a couple of relievers going out on rehab assignments. However, Trevor McGill traveled to Appleton. He made his first rehab appearance on Thursday night, throwing a perfect inning for the Timber Rattlers. And Oli Paredes is set to join him. He's going to begin his rehab assignments on Friday. So a couple of arms that should be lined up to join the Brewers pretty soon, particularly McGill. It wasn't a long absence for him. Pat Murphy did raise the possibility that it could be a one outing thing, but we'll kind of see what route they choose to go there. So now that we have all of those logistical things out of the way, we can dive into the weekend review. The Brewers beginning their longest homestand of the week, 10 games, or longest homestand of the year, 10 games in 10 days. They've completed series against the Reds and the Dodgers. They have the Guardians left for a 3-game set, and then that'll wrap up that homestand. So starting with that Red series, the Brewers taking 2 out of 3 in that one. They continued their, at the time, hot hitting ways in game one, winning that one by a final of 8-3. 6 out of the 8 runs from Milwaukee in this one, scoring on a pair of homers. Willy Adames hitting a 3-run shot in the first. Bryce Terang, a 2-run homer in the second. The Brewers did not record a hit after the third inning in this one. So if anyone wants to somehow take a negative angle on this game, you could play devil's advocate in that way. And I guess in a sense, it was a little bit of a precursor of what was to come in the following games, as the offense not able to maintain what they did in this one, but still a good showing for them in game one. Aaron Zavalli with one of his best starts as a Brewer, pitching into the 7th inning, 6 in the third, 5 hits allowed, 2 earned, a couple of walks, and 5 strikeouts. So we won't go into too much more detail on game one. Game two, the Brewers winning this one by a final of 1-0. Tobias Myers, for the third time this season, working into the 8th inning. He went 7 in the third, 3 hits allowed, setting a career high with 9 strikeouts. And then the lone run in this one for the Brewers, scoring in the 8th on a Rhys Hoskins home run. Rhys had pretty tough month of July. He's come back pretty strong in the month of August, especially in the power department. And Kurt, we kind of talked about how you're going to backfill that loss of Christian Yelich and how the Brewers have been doing it so far. Rhys Hoskins starting to pick it up in the power department has been something that's helped them out a lot. Just how big of a factor does he become now? He was always a big factor in the success this lineup was going to have. But how much more focus is there on him now as a power guy and also just a veteran guy as well? Someone that Pat Murphy likes to call a pillar.
Yeah. He's one of the pillars.
He's a pillar.
And that doesn't change. No one gets added and no one gets taken away. Once you're a pillar, well, I would like to see what it would take to, you can get, I guess, a pillar revoked, but then the whole thing crumbles. And we don't want to see that. So,
well, can you like slide one out and push another one back in, like the Indiana Jones scene where he's like trying to swap out the statue in the temple?
I suppose you could. I have seen entire houses lifted up, so maybe it's that sort of thing.
Okay.
You could slide Gary in there. No, but it's really important. I mean, you're not going to replace Christian Yelich's production like in the outfield in terms of your offense. We've seen that. We know that. Probably not going to fully replace it in what it would have been the rest of the season from anyone else at that point either. But in a short series, Jack, who's to say Christian Yelich if you play 5 games, who's to say he wasn't going to hit 100? And you just don't know what the performance would have been from a guy in a baseball series, and that's why I'm not writing this team off because of it. And Reese Hoskins is a dude who's done it. He can do it. He's showing that he's still capable of it. The total numbers are still right, probably what, a little over league average on offense. Um, but you see how he's going about it, and you kind of you look at the power and you go, okay, that is the thing that can change a short series. He's got it. And so if you're looking for someone that can really bring offense in a few games, yeah, he's one of those guys. And you can, like, there's other spots too. Gary Sanchez in the lineup, for instance, would like to if he's hitting like this, you'd like to see a guy like that get some playoff at bats. You don't have to, you don't have to use that DH on Yelich or Contreras, or like you've had to do throughout the regular season. You can use it on Gary Sanchez. Jake Bauers is the guy, but Gary's at bats have been really good too. I know this question was not about Gary, but Pat Murphy, as you know, has called him a complete hitter. He trusts him,
He
and you know
does.
what? Maybe I say the same thing.
Well, I don't think Gary Sanchez has gotten enough acknowledgement for essentially doing exactly what his job has been this year. He was signed to fill a part-time role, catch a couple games when William Contreras decides he is finally willing to take a day off, and then also DH against left-handed pitching. On top of that, he's given the Brewers a little bit of pop. He's had some surprisingly balanced at bats this year. He's got the highest batting average of his career since, I'm going off the top of my head here, I want to say 2016. It's been a while. He's hitting in the 240s now. And, batting average is hardly an end all be all, but it kind of shows that at least one area of his game this year has been a little bit better than it's been in the past. But he's been a slightly above average bat for them this year in a part time role. And he's a guy who also, in that Reese Hoskins mold, can change a series with one swing. So I don't think that he's got enough recognition for what he's done this year. And that's always something that can happen with a guy who's not playing every day. But yeah, he is still very much a part of this mix, especially now with the Yelich down. If you're looking for a guy who can supply a little bit of power here and there.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Final note on this one. As we mentioned, it was a Brewers 1-0 win. Devin Williams completed the shutout. He struck out the side in the ninth for his first save of the season, which came over 2 weeks after he was activated off the injured list. So it took a little while for Devin Williams to finally secure that save, but he would be pretty busy this week, as we'll get to in some of these later games. Game 3 is when the good times would stop for the Brewers for a couple evenings. They lost this one by a score of 4-3. Main story in this one, DL Hall making his first start since late April for the Brewers. And we were both there watching this one. And I liked what I saw. The final line isn't anything amazing. It's 4 2/3, 4 hits allowed, 3 runs, only one of them earned. But the 9 strikeouts really stand out. He had a few walks mixed in there as well. But the 9 Ks are what jumped out to me. The fastball velo was at 94 to 95 for pretty much the entire start. I think he only threw one pitch that barely dipped below 93, and it was 92.9 or something. That was about as soft as his fastball got that day. So the velo is where you wanted to see it. The strikeouts were there. The promise that he flashed with the secondaries even before he hit the injured list was still there. He located some changeups really well to righties. I liked what I saw here. Unfortunately, just due to the state of the roster and the Brewers needing to take advantage of innings for the rest of the week, he was optioned back down after this. But I saw enough here to think that he's still very much a factor for this team the rest of the way. What did you think?
Oh, yeah, totally. He went from, like, maybe probably being a factor to definitely think he can and should get a chance to be. He looked like he got a little tired at the end. The command, which is always the deal with him, he started to lose that both in the zone and out of the zone. And they tried to stretch him through 5 innings, and he was stretched out enough to go that deep. But it looked like the fatigue got to him a little. And you know what? That's probably not a terrible thing, because I don't think you're going to ask him to get more than one time, maybe one plus time through the lineup, in a big spot if you need him to. You could have him go in short stints, depending on how the bullpen picture ends up playing out. He'd go even shorter stints. But yeah, the stuff looked much more like the DL Hall we expected when the Brewers traded for him. I think he hit 96 maybe or like 95.9 once. Like he was just steady holding the velo for pretty much the entire outing. The slider looked really good. Like the way he was just moving too, the whole the whole piece of his mechanics looked natural. And it did not look natural for spring training plus his first 4 starts. Because guess what? He had a pretty serious meniscus injury that he was trying to pitch through, um, which maybe don't do that, guys. Don't pitch through meniscus tears. But what are you going to do? He's definitely in the picture for me. The Brewers right now they're 9 games up. They kind of just need to like cover innings in some of these games and like preserve some depth to get to the finish line. Um, but DL Hall, I would like to see more of him, and it doesn't even have to be like next week or this week or whatever. Like keep letting him get outings somewhere, keep improving, and then hopefully he can play a significant role for this team down the stretch in the postseason. The
Yeah.
deeper they go, the more likely he's going to get chances. Like a shorter series is, it's he's a little lower on the depth chart. But the longer it goes, the more chances.
Yeah, definitely think we're gonna see him again. Kind of a side note as well, so they optioned him to AAA, but if he comes back up by the time that rosters expand at the start of September, that doesn't burn his option because he wasn't down there for the minimum 20 days that you need to be in the minor leagues to burn an option, so that's some roster technicality there as well that kinda matters for the Brewers, so they took advantage of the fact that he has that option year left just for the purpose of roster flexibility, but there is a pretty decent chance he doesn't end up losing that going into next year. Will they need it anyway? I'm not sure because I think that he's still going to be a very big part of however they try to line up this pitching staff next year. But again, definitely think he's going to get more chances for them this year. Good stuff from him in his return. On the offensive side of the ball for the Brewers in this one, Joey Ortiz got it started with a 2-run homer in the second inning. Unfortunately, that lead would be erased by 2 unearned runs scored off of Hall in the fourth. Willy Adames committing another error to start the inning. We'll get to this a little bit later because there's more Adames defense to talk about in the Dodgers series, but he made another misplay in this one, and then Tyler Stevenson hitting a home run in the fifth, which is when DL's control really started to waver. He made a mistake pitch there. Stevenson made him pay. Adames would attempt to redeem himself with a game-tying single in the sixth inning, but after that, we were treated to high leverage Joe Ross in the seventh inning, and Joe Ross did not actually pitch badly in this game. He ended up covering the final 3 innings and only gave up that run in the seventh. What I really come back to here is a management decision as part of this inning. So Joe Ross puts a man on base. Pat Murphy elects, or I shouldn't say just Pat Murphy, the Brewers bench elects to walk Ellie De La Cruz to set up a double play. Murphy said that he didn't want Ross pitching to De La Cruz, who, mind you, at this point only had 1 hit in the series. The Brewers did have his number in this series, but they elected to put him on base here. He didn't want Ross pitching to the lefty. He wanted to set up the double play ball. Unfortunately, Joe Ross walks the next dude, which sets up a sac fly to bring in that run. This was a point of discussion after the game as to whether or not you walk Ellie De La Cruz there. Kurt, what are your thoughts on walking Ellie De La Cruz?
I'm just like anti-intentional walks in most cases. I think that there was a spot earlier in the year. It was the game Blake Perkins ended, right? With throwing out a runner at home on an Espinal bloop. Where I was
Mhm.
probably okay with that walk, the way Ellie was going at that point, and Espinal right on right next. But I didn't love this move. This one, I have a feeling we're going to get to some more tactical decisions
We'll get to more,
as
yes.
we go on this pod. Of the moves I would have some questions about and had some questions about this week, this was probably the one that was least offensive to me, just because the go ahead run was already in scoring position. Um, I don't love the one out intentional walk in this spot, especially like you want to kind of prevent the big inning in a tie game in the seventh. Like one run did hurt, it did end, decide the game there, but one run doesn't kill you in the seventh inning. Now, granted, Ellie could hit a homer and it could kill you, but I just the way he was going in that series was not great to that point. I think Joe Ross struck him out in the next at bat. He had a sombrero in each game. I just the principle of it, like I understand why Ellie's the guy you walk there, but I just don't love intentional walks, especially in the seventh inning of a tie game.
I do feel like that is one of the differences you can kind of pinpoint between Pat Murphy and his predecessor. Is it seems, and granted, I haven't looked up the numbers to back this up, but it does seem that Murph is a little bit more inclined to use the intentional walk. Craig Counsell was not a fan of putting guys on base if he didn't have to. It does seem like under Pat Murphy, there are times where he thinks it makes a little bit more sense strategically to do that. This is one of the times that they did it in this situation. Obviously, didn't work out in the sense that you didn't get the scoreless inning there, but you could also, play devil's advocate on his side. What happens if De La Cruz burns you with a home run there? Also, kind of an interesting choice in this game, just going to Joe Ross there. You had him warming up in the bullpen. The Brewers then came back to tie it on that Adames single. There was no change to the pitching plan after that. I can kind of go either way on this one, and really what kind of swung me to that point. At first, I had no problems with it because the pen was not in good shape that day. You had Hobie out to bring up DL, so you're already a man short in the bullpen, and you also have a couple guys who are probably off limits for that game. Piamps had thrown in 4 of 5 going into that one, so he was not an option for that one. You were shorthanded that day, but then it turned out Devin Williams was available for this game. I was operating under the assumption that he wasn't, but then he ended up warming up in the event that the Brewers tied it. So with that knowledge in mind, I think you maybe could have gone to someone other than Joe Ross, but I still understand why you do it. It's still smart management to really focus on workloads and just balance that with trying to win the game in front of you. And I do think that's something that Murphy's gotten a lot better at as the season has progressed compared to how he was using guys early in the year. But what was kind of running through your head when Joe Ross trotted out of the
Yeah,
bullpen to
oh,
get that
total
seventh inning?
confusion that Joe Ross got the tie game, but, like, and now I'm looking back at it, and you have the perspective, okay, they've got all these games in a row. They had the Dodgers coming to town. They had taken the first 2 against the Reds, like, sometimes it's not punting it, the game. It's tied. You're going with a guy who's not terrible, but it was sort of like a close cousin of the Craig Counsell effort uh, bullpen games. Um, I mean, the Brewers were fully clinched by this point last year, but when they went with Bosley late in the game and Clayton Andrews, I mean, this kind of reminded me of that White Sox Sunday game where it was the Kevin Herget / Anoli Paredes game,
Love
a,
the
a
Kevin Herget game.
legendary baseball game. Tommy Pham was shadow boxing. I can't wait to see Tommy Pham next week, by the way.
That's
But
right. He's in St. Louis now again.
it was fine. It was fine. Joe Ross went 3 innings, gave up 1 run. Like we saw what they bumped Tobias Myers up a day. They swapped him and Aaron Savali for this Dodgers series. Like they were putting their eggs a little more in the Dodgers basket. And you know what? That's probably the smart thing to do. The Reds aren't a particularly great team. They're playing bad baseball at the time. Maybe Joe Ross can sneak through a couple innings without giving up a run. Then you turn it over to Devin. Didn't work out. Offense should have scored more than 3 runs in that game anyway.
Yeah, you already got that series in the bag too. You have a big one coming up with the Dodgers after that big stretch of games in a row. It even knowing that Devin was available and you probably could have veered away from Joe Ross because you did in theory have 3 guys available for the final 3 innings of a close game. I still think it's fine. Like this is what responsible reliever workload management needs to look like sometimes. And in the context of this series too, and what the Brewers had coming up after that, I do think it made a lot of sense. So we'll dive into what the Brewers had coming up after this Reds series. They split a 4-game series with the Dodgers, dropping the first 2 and then coming back to sneak away with the final 2 is the way that I'll phrase the way the rest of this series went. But we'll start with game 1. Dodgers winning this one by a score of 5-2. Freddie Peralta on the bump for game 1. He gave the Brewers 6 innings, but he did allow 4 earned runs, those runs scoring on 2 home runs. Mookie Betts hit a 2-run shot. Shohei Ohtani hit a 2-run shot. This one was interesting because I think just on the surface, you look at the line and it can be easy to lump this into the Freddie Peralta disappointing outing bucket, which is a bucket that has been steadily growing this year. The contents of that bucket have been steadily increasing. But he was facing a really good lineup in this one. He gave up 5 hits. Like, I think he threw the ball well for the most part. He got beat by 2 good hitters. The Mookie Betts pitch was a little bit of a mistake. He didn't hit his spot with that one, but the Shohei Ohtani home run was a 3-0 fastball up and outside a couple inches off the plate, and he just nuked it into left. Like, that's a good hitter getting to a pitch that most guys are not going to get to, so I didn't really have a problem with that one. I thought that this was just a pitcher having a respectable outing against a good lineup, and when you have a respectable outing, like respectable quality pitching against a good lineup, you can give up 4 runs in 6 innings. That was my takeaway from it.
The show you could argue, I mean, it's Shohei, so this argument might not hold up, but you could argue that was a bad swing decision. I mean, it's
Yeah,
a
you
3-0
could.
pitch fastball out of the zone. He's just a freak against everyone but Devin Williams, I guess. So he gets licensed to swing at that pitch because he can hit it 400 feet the other way. But no, I mean, this was not the start for Freddie to like pick nits with. There are still like the underlying questions, and I wrote about it this week with the fastball. I mean, and again, this was Shohei, but the 3-0 fastball there getting hit 400 feet the other way, like that's not the elite fastball that we've seen him have in past years, and he has not had the elite fastball this year. And we don't have to go into the whole Freddie Peralta what's wrong discussion right now, but like at some point, and maybe this isn't fair to a pitcher or him, like at some point you just you want him to go out there against a lineup like that and throw 7 shutout, strike out 9. Like because it's in there because you've seen it. He's close in even these outings where the line's not very good. Like this one, there's a couple other ones where he threw the ball okay, threw the ball actually more than okay, and just a couple of bad spots here and there. Um, yeah, this is the Freddie Peralta experience that we're on right now. He's not far off, but there's enough questions with like, can the fastball be good enough to get him to the point where he needs to be? Like he's not far off, but what is it going to take for him to get back on track? And does he still have that pitch in him?
Yeah, it's the fastball obviously has not been what it's been in the past. Mainly, we're just seeing more damage against it. The swing and miss hasn't changed a whole lot, but we're seeing more damage. And I know that was something that you talked about, and we won't dive into the whole thing, but everyone who's been listening to this pod throughout the year kind of knows what the position that we've taken on this has been. But it really just comes down to Freddie Peralta has high standards around it. He has high expectations around him, and there's a reason for that because he is capable of so much more than a lot of the other guys in this rotation. Like I love me some Colin Ray, I love me some Toby Myers. Those guys are having success for valid reasons. They are good big league pitchers. They're solid big league pitchers. But they're not going to reach the heights that Freddie Peralta is capable of reaching. Like they don't have that. Freddie Peralta has a higher ceiling than these guys, and he's also been in the league for a while now. He's 28 years old. You would hope that things would have come together by this point consistently, and it hasn't happened yet. The Brewers were hoping that it would have come together by this point consistently. That's why you feel comfortable trading Corbin Burns and sliding Freddie into that number 1 spot. Obviously, if Brandon Woodruff is healthy, it changes the picture a little bit, but still, the Brewers felt comfortable going into the year with him as the number 1 because they traded Burns after they already knew that Woody was going to miss the entire year after the shoulder surgery. So most guys, if they had Freddie Peralta's line, that would be a perfectly solid season for them. But they're not Freddie Peralta. Freddie Peralta is capable of so much more than those kinds of guys. So when Freddie Peralta has that line, it is a little bit disappointing. But again, this is not the outing to really reflect that trend. So that's kind of
Yeah,
the way to sum this one up.
yeah.
But
I will say, to throw in there, this is the biggest thing story for the Brewers the rest of the way. You wanna go on a deep run, you need Freddie Peralta. You need him to be
yeah,
better. And hopefully for the Brewers, he's capable of it. He's shown flashes of it. You know, throughout his career, his ceiling has shown that he's more than capable of it. Um, but it's like you got to see Tobias Myers grind through 5 2/3, 2 runs against this Dodgers lineup with like, well, 3 of his last 4 outings. Really, he hasn't been all that great. Yet you look at the
no.
end of line at the end of the day, and it's like 1 run, 1 run,
Mhm.
2 runs, 2 earned runs. And it's like that's kind of what you want to see from Freddie sometimes, is just like find a way to get through it, and put up a really good line.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully he's able to find a way to do that the rest of the way because, like you said, that's that really changes the entire dynamic of not just this rotation, but this pitching staff, if that's the version of him that you're getting, especially in game 1 of a playoff series. So, it would be really nice to get him on that kind of run and flashing that ceiling more consistently. On the offensive side, the Brewers only putting up 2 in this one. Those 2 runs scored on a 2-run home run by William Contreras, who flashed a lot of power in this series. We'll talk about that more as we keep going through this. Game 2, this was the really rough one. Dodgers 7, Brewers 2. This was not a Colin Ray special. This was by happenstance, one of Colin Ray's least productive outings of the year. He did still go 6 innings in this one, and I guess that kinda comes back to, like, the Freddie point. Like, it seems like Colin Ray just always finds a way to get you through X amount of innings and keep you in a ball game. He didn't keep you in the ball game this time, but this is probably only one of, what, 2 or 3 starts where he didn't keep the Brewers in a ball game, and he still was able to give him some length in this one, but he did get hit hard. He gave up 10 hits and allowed as many home runs as strikeouts, 4 home runs off of Colin Ray as opposed to 4 strikeouts. Just not a good night for him that put the Brewers in a hole that they would not be able to dig out of. It seemed like for a moment they were going to be able to potentially claw back into this one. They were only down 2-0 early on. William Contreras, once again, homering. He hit a solo shot in the 3rd inning that briefly brought the Brewers back in it 2-1. And then we had the no good, very bad 5-run inning against Colin Ray. So not a good night for Code Red. What was going through your mind when you were watching Code Red get hit
Well,
around pretty good?
you jinxed him, first off. Jinxes are very real, as we have learned
Uh-huh.
from
That
baseball
that was
players
that's
in recent
yeah,
days.
that's the unofficial storyline of this homestand.
Yeah, I can't
Jinxes
believe it took
are
us 40
I
minutes to get into this.
I'm
Don't
I'm s
jinx things.
I'm still not someone who believes in jinxes, but if this series has taught me anything, it's that everybody else around me believes in jinxes, so I'm like
Well,
one man on my own island
I
here.
do believe in, um, non-fortuitous timing of baseball as a
Okay.
reporter. Like, you write a story, "Oh, that guy's gonna get cooked his next time." Like, that's just how it goes. Um, I was taught early on by friend of the show, I'm guessing, Adam McCalvey, don't write about relievers before a game. He also was more and more don't write about relievers, but especially before a game, because then they're gonna get lit up. So that stuck with me. But sometimes you got to write about a guy and then he just gets lit up. That's what happens. Is it a jinx? Probably not. It's just baseball. Um, there's variations. Sometimes guys get lit up. No, I didn't really have a ton of thoughts about this game. Sometimes the Dodgers just demolish pitchers, and Colin Ray was in the zone and he got demolished. And that hasn't happened much this year. So you move on.
Yeah, on the unfortunate timing front, if anyone would still like to read the Colin Ray feature that's up at Brewer Fanatic, it all still factually holds true because I talked to him and I talked to Chris Hook, and we all kind of broke down what had made him so successful going into this outing. And all of that is still true. He was still on a really nice run leading into this one, striking out a lot more guys. Had to do with some mechanical changes he made that's kind of giving the ball a little bit more deceptions. He's made some changes to the way he used his pitches going into this one. He had really neutralized that platoon split that had been problematic for him. So if anyone wants to go and still look at that, you're more than welcome to. Those numbers are still accurate for the stretch that they are describing. I'll just leave that there. Colin Ray will get back on track. I'm not especially worried about him. He's going to be fine, I think. Still continuing to be a solid middle of the rotation arm for the Brewers, who has been called on to fill a little bit more than that, just in light of what's happened to the rest of the rotation this year. But not a good night for him. That's okay. That's really all we have to talk about from game 2. Games 3 and 4, the Brewers winning these two. This is kind of where the action starts because there was a lot that happened in these two games. We'll start with game 3, the Brewers winning 5-4. Kurt, have you ever seen a game where there were 9 runs scored and only 2 of them were earned?
Yes, it happened on Wednesday.
Have you
Before
ever
that,
seen a
no.
game before Wednesday in which 9 runs were scored and 2 of them
Well,
were
I
earned?
mean, I covered high school sports for about 7 years.
Have you ever
Other than
seen a Major League Baseball game
and
before
this is
Wednesday night
you're gonna
in
never
which
allow me
9
back
runs
on
were
this
scored and 2
podcast,
were
are
earned?
you? Well, I would say when you have the 2 of the best 2 of the 3 best teams in the National League by record and the best by run differential probably, com having a game that you compare to a high school game is not good. It was not a good baseball game until the 9th inning, and then it was, like, as good of a 9th inning without, like, a big comeback as you can have. You can honestly kind of probably loop Wednesdays and Thursdays games together, like, they were not clean for either
No.
team, and they featured, like, an almost identical 9th inning and a late Brewers rally or comeback or whatever term you wanna use, because they weren't losing going into the 7th inning on Wednesday, but not a clean game. Did Willie make a bad play in this game too, or was that Thursday?
That was on Thursday. In this
Yeah,
one, it was the leadoff error by Joey Ortiz
Major
that led
Ortiz, yeah.
to 3 unearned runs for Frankie Montas in the first inning, but he would then settle in to go 5 innings, 6 strikeouts for him, got over 100 pitches in this one. So not the most efficient outing, but again, he also had to throw about an extra 20 pitches in that first inning because some plays weren't made behind him. Frankie Montas, I'll be honest, has in that start particularly exceeded my expectations. He actually threw the ball pretty darn well in that start. He did make an interesting tweak in this one. He's normally a big splitter guy because that's historically been his best pitch. He only threw 8 of them in this outing. And in the clubhouse after the game, he said it was mainly just because the Dodgers don't chase. And a splitter is not going to be a productive in zone pitch. You're going for chase with that pitch. So there was a little bit of an adjustment, really attacked him with all 3 fastballs, the four seamer, the sinker, the cutter. The Brewers really loved their 3 fastball pitchers, and Frankie Montas falls into that trend, but it was probably his best outing of the year so far for the Brewers, best out of 3.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably pretty accurate. And it was like that's big. You need to see something like that from him. Although I'm still not sure how he fits into the playoff picture, but you're going to get to this finish line somehow anyway. But
Mhm.
you would think hopefully there's something more in there, some sort of trustworthy level in the playoffs. So yeah, a positive outing for him for sure. Like I just said, Tobias Myers, you just get through it somehow. He got through it. I was surprised they kept him in the game for the 5th inning, but or through the end of the 5th inning. But he just barely managed to get through it, but he
He
managed to
did.
get through it.
Managed to get through it by about 3 feet. Warning track fly ball to end that 5th inning out to left. But he did get through the 5 innings with no earned runs, just the 3 unearned in the first. The Brewers in this one putting together a potential early rally. They loaded the bases in the first. William Contreras hits a line drive out to center. Not Garrett Mitchell, Bryce Terang tags from third. Did not have an opportunity to touch home plate as he slid. Austin Barnes, when the play was all said and done, by the time Terang was there, was in front of home plate. Terang had nowhere to go. It's not called blocking the plate. The Brewers elect not to challenge. Based on Pat Murphy's comments after the game, it kind of sounded like they thought he was blocking the plate, but they just didn't think it stood a chance of being overturned because it is mainly a judgment call. And there's kind of all these little nuances about, well, did the throw take him into the plate or did he position himself in front of the plate? Watching this one back, my My read on the play as it's going down is Barnes was not trying to block the plate, but he sees this throw coming in, and it was a one-hop throw. He drops back before he's got that ball to the point that he is in front of the plate. At the very least, his back knee is in front of the plate, his left knee. And it looked to me like he was just kind of instinctively backing up because that was the best way for him to play that hop. But if you watch that throw come in, he could have made the play without having to move back, and he didn't have the ball yet at that point. So I don't think you can say the throw took him into the plate. So again, it's tricky, but I think he was blocking the plate. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought he was blocking the plate too. Like, it was I think it was a really I don't know if it was on purpose, but a headsy, like, good play by Austin Barnes. He's gonna be safe if you don't do that, and he didn't clearly, like, make a blocking move in the way you normally associate it because he was fielding the ball in that play. I don't think it gets overturned, like, if I had to
Yeah,
guess, but I don't like the reason to not challenge or you can't not challenge that play because you're afraid of the result. Like, you have there's no certainty that it doesn't get overturned. It might not. Like these things, MLB is kind of wonky with their with how they enforce this, and like, there's a judgment, element of it, like you mentioned, and don't really overturn umpires' judgments a ton. But there was enough there for sure to think that maybe they would overturn. I mean, Austin Barnes' left leg was entirely blocking the plate before he had the baseball, and the throw was right in line with home. That enough right there is enough to make me think maybe they would have overturned it, especially in that moment too. Man, the Brewers came back to win this game. That's huge on them for picking themselves off the mat and doing it. But that felt like a crushing moment. Bases loaded, no outs, down three to not getting any runs because of that call. Like Murphy said, emotionally you want to challenge it, but logically he didn't. That's fine. Emotionally challenge it in that spot. I'm not saying that's generally a good idea, but I think that would have been a big play. I would have challenged it. Once again, though, no one knows what any of these blocking rules are. They just continue to be called as they're called, and no one understands it. So that's cool.
it's really cool. I don't think you can challenge this one because it's the first inning. Like I don't think you can run the risk of losing your challenge in the first inning. I get like just there definitely is something to be said for if you can get them to overturn. It's a huge swing, just momentum wise, and the way the rest of that inning can unfold. But I just knowing the way that they tend to look at these judgment calls, they don't like to overturn an umpire's discretion, like you said, or an umpire's judgment. They'll overturn it if it's like clearly objectively like black and white wrong call, like the throw beat him to the base or the tag beat him to the base. But if it's a judgment call, it gets so much trickier. And I I completely agree with what Murphy said. Like emotionally, you want to challenge it. Logically, you probably shouldn't. That's probably not the best way to play it. So the Brewers electing not to challenge. Instead, they would start their comeback in the second inning when Jake Bauers hit a solo home run. That would be the only earned run scored by the Brewers in this game. Like I said before, both teams only scoring one earned. So the Brewers scoring a couple more in the second as well. Then they would score again in the fourth and in the seventh. Each time they scored for the rest of that game in those innings, they were assisted by errors each time. So the Brewers going into the seventh inning with a lead. Pat Murphy goes to Jared Koenig to start this inning. The inning unfolds. You end up with runners on the corners and two outs. Koenig, the left-handed pitcher. Gavin Lux is due up, the left-handed batter. Dave Roberts pinch hits with fellow infielder Miguel Rojas, a right-handed bat. Yoel Payamps was warming in the bullpen for the entirety of that inning, so he's ready to go. Murphy lets it ride with Jared Koenig. Miguel Rojas hits a game-time single. The really the first of several decisions, management decisions in this series that you can have a pretty spirited debate on. Murphy's explanation for this was he thought that they were essentially using Miguel Rojas as a decoy to bait him into putting in Yoel Payamps, at which point they would switch out for Jason Hayward. I completely understand what he's thinking. I don't think that's what they were going to do. I have a really hard time believing that they were going to burn Miguel Rojas there. But I'll go to your thoughts on this first before I talk about it anymore, but I get what he's thinking, but I almost wonder if he gave Dave Roberts a little too much credit. I don't think that they were going to burn Rojas there, but I'll pass the floor to you first.
Yeah. What I mean, maybe they were. Maybe who's to say they go to Jason Hayward there? Even if they are, this version of Jason Hayward does not daunt me. He faced Piamps the next inning, as we saw, and just rolled over on a ball. Like, I don't know, maybe last year's Jason Hayward, he had a little like reinvigoration. He was rejuvenated, but like they also could pitch around him. If they love that right on right with Kike Hernandez, as we saw when they went to Peguero in Thursday's game. They specifically brought him in to face Hernandez because Kike's not great against righties. Everyone knows that. He's a lefty masher. So there were other avenues here besides letting Koenig face Rojas, which I think in this instance is the worst matchup for the Brewers. Now, the go ahead run was already on base. Do you want to, if you pitch around Hayward, do you want to walk that guy to second base? Maybe that's not a great idea, but still, then you get Piamps against Kike Hernandez, and I love that matchup for the Brewers. Piamps has what, a 430, 440, 450, whatever OPS against righties.
Yeah, like
Dominates them.
450,
Kike
480,
Hernandez,
whatever it is. Yeah.
yeah, Kike Hernandez struggles against righties. I don't know what his splits are this year, but
Bad.
historically, yeah, this is just kind of how he is as a player. The Dodgers are using him in this like everyday role because oddly enough, the Dodgers sort of have to. But I thought there were a lot of different ways they could play this, and you don't know for sure that the Dodgers are going to go to Jason Hayward. And if they do, like I said, you still have outs. You can pitch to him. You can be careful with him. Just like pepper him with sinkers and changeups at the very bottom of the zone. Maybe he'll roll over as he does. Pitch around him if he takes the walk, and then go after Hernandez. I did not love the move. Yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I didn't love it either. Again, we'll get to more moves as this series goes on. Funny enough, like in the grand scheme of the series, this somehow ended up being a move I almost kind of forgot about shortly thereafter, just because of what happened the next day. But yeah, I'm going to Piamps there, and again, I think I might take the Koenig Rojas matchup over the Piamps Hayward matchup. Maybe. I haven't looked at what Hayward's splits are against righties this year. I know his overall line is not good. Piamps has struggled against lefties this year, although he's looked a lot better over these last couple weeks. So if these are different versions of him we're talking about, can you necessarily apply those splits the same way? I don't know. But I'm not convinced that they would have
Hayward
hit
made
Hayward.
this Hayward has barely faced lefties, so take this with a large grain of salt. Actually, ignore his lefty splits. It's 846 and OPS and 13 at bats. But
Okay,
against
that's even
righties,
better.
it's 646. So
Okay, so he's not so
not
he's not hitting
great.
righties either. So yeah, it's
not a great matchup for Piamps still because it's just a lefty. But
but
yeah, there's more to talk about. And again, this was not at the top of the list of moves to discuss.
So we'll leave it there. Last thing I'm going to say is just, again, I'm not sold that they were going to hit Hayward there. Is Miguel Rojas the guy you burn your last good defensive infielder on the roster? Is that the guy? Like, are you actually willing to burn him there? He came into the game. He would end up playing second base for a couple innings, and then he moved over to short because they hit Hayward for Nick Ahmed. So, I guess I'm just not convinced that he was actually intending to burn him, but who knows? So, I probably would have played it differently, but not the most egregious decision that was made in this series. Recapping the rest of this game, the Brewers scoring the eventual winning run on a Jackson Churio single that also featured a Mookie Betts fielding error in right field, so Joey Ortiz was able to score from second for that fifth run. And then Devin Williams with one of the more impressive saves I've seen, retiring Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, and Freddie Freeman in order on 7 pitches, all strikes. Nothing especially close to the heart of the plate. This might actually be one of the better outings that I've ever seen from Devin Williams command-wise. There was nothing for them to do anything with this entire inning. So really impressive stuff on that front.
No, yeah, nothing. It literally does not get better than that save, carving up three of the best 5 or 10 hitters in baseball is remarkable with a run lead.
And doing it that quickly too. It took him under 10 pitches and they were all strikes. Like I'm not sure that there's a better way to get that job done. So Devin Williams had himself a pretty big series too, a pretty impactful one despite only pitching 2 innings in this one. But game 4, the Brewers coming away with another comeback win here, 6-4, or another late rally, I should say. But the Brewers grabbing an early 3-0 lead in this one off of Jack Flaherty. They hit 2 home runs off him in the first inning. Jackson Churio and William Contreras once again going deep in this series. Dodgers would kind of weasel their way back into this one. They put up 2 unearned runs against Tobias Myers in the second. And this is where we'll start to talk about Willy Adames a little bit more. Another error for him in this one as part of this sequence. Ground ball is short. Up in the air as to whether it would have been a double play turn. They may not have had enough time. But at the very least, instead of getting the lead out there, Adames throws that ball into right field. You end up with runners on second and third. And that just really positions LA significantly better in that inning, obviously. And this is part of a trend for Willy Adames. The defense has not been good for him. I wrote about this a few days ago at Brewer Fanatic, just how much the defense has dropped off, both by just looking at the eye test and going by a more rudimentary stat like errors, but also looking at the advanced metrics. And they disagree a little bit about the extent to which the drop off has happened. Like outs above average still says that he's slightly above average. But even if you take that most generous evaluation, that's still a huge drop off from one of the best defensive shortstop in baseball, which is how he graded out by every single metric last year. DRS has him now at -9 going into today as of this recording. And when I wrote the story a few days prior, it was -7. So he already tacked on a couple more runs worth of defense that he lost. And some impactful errors like this one are gonna certainly ding that total for sure. But this is a problem. Like, there's an argument to be made right now that the Brewers have 3 shortstops in their starting infield, and the worst defender is playing shortstop, at least the guy who's been the worst defender for the last several weeks. And I'll read off another stat here that I looked up today, or on Thursday, that is, after he made this error. So Willy Adames has 14 errors this season, and that's not super far off from the pace that he is usually on. But the 2 main differences are almost all of them are fielding errors. This one was a throwing error, so you can add that one to that tally. But what also stands out is 12 of those 14 errors have come since the middle of June, which is very, very alarming. Like, he has not been remotely close to being a sure-handed defender in the infield for about 2 months now. And for a team like the Brewers that's relying on their defense pretty heavily to help some pitchers play up beyond the results they might otherwise get, that's a pretty big deal, and it's something that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, the eye test, which whatever you want to say what you want, but like we watch these guys play a lot of defense every day, and in person you get a pretty decent like view of it over the course of a full season. It's not good. It's bad. It's bad. I mean, I think there's 9 or 10 errors since like some point in that first Dodgers series. That was a little over a month ago with an All-Star break in there. It's sometimes guys can be like sneaky bad on defense when they just don't have great range and don't get the balls. Willie's is just being is his he's bad right now because he's making really bad plays. That's as simple as it is, and that's what makes it kind of easy to evaluate right now. It's strange to see from a guy who has been elite defensively and has that skill set in him, has a fantastic arm. Yeah, I'm not used to seeing this from him at all. They need to get this fixed.
Absolutely. So the Dodgers, like I said, putting up those 2 unearned runs in the second. They would then tie it in the third inning on a Gavin Lux single. Things would kind of hold there for a little bit until we got to the 6th inning. So this is the one where I'm just going to say it point blank. Pat Murphy did a bad job managing the pitching in this one. So first of all, you start with Myers. This was an interesting one for me because Murphy has had a pretty quick hook with Tobias Myers throughout the entire season, even as recently as that series in Washington, where he pulled him really early in that series because the reasons that he cited were number one, it was a hot day. So he said fatigue was setting in sooner than the pitch count might suggest, which, okay. But he also pointed to like some of the contact against him, the command, different things like that. Tobias Myers, the first two times through the Dodgers order, had two whiffs and four batted balls that were hit over 100 miles an hour. Like, this is not a guy who was really cruising. Like, there were signs there that the Dodgers were already piecing him up pretty well. And Pat Murphy still sent him out for the fifth to face the top of the order a third time. Somehow he got through it, even though all three batted balls, or all three outs, I should say, were hard hit. Or not all three outs. Three batted balls are hard hit because the Otani base hit put him on base. That was a single. But three well struck balls in that inning, two of them over 100 miles an hour. Somehow he gets out of that without any damage. Then he sends him back out for the sixth and makes the decision then to go to Elvis Peguero with runners on the corners and two outs and Kike Hernandez coming up. You also had Brian Hudson ready in the bullpen at this point. Shohei Otani is on deck. Like, it's very clear what the objective was here. It's like, I'm very confident Elvis is going to get this right-handed hitter out. But this has already been a point of discussion. But we can kind of go through the numbers here a little bit. So Elvis Peguero entering this outing, reverse splits, right? He's had a 747 OPS against him going into this one. He has a 1.5 whip nearly. It's like 1.45 going into this outing. So he's a guy who gives up a lot of his own base runners. Like, he can usually get out of it because then he'll roll a double play ball after he puts a couple guys on, but he's going to put his own runners on, which is not favorable for when you're inheriting runners to begin with. And then you have the reverse split. So he's in a matchup that's not actually that favorable for him. And 64% of inherited runners have scored against him. That's not a good number. And then something that I didn't know going into this, and this is what you tweeted out, opponents are hitting like 340 off of him the first batter of his appearances. So, like, just everything about this points to a guy who is never likely to work a clean inning to right-handed batters. And yet somehow he's become Pat Murphy's preferred choice as the fireman with men on base and a right-handed batter coming up. And he did it again in this spot, and it didn't work. And to be fair, this is one of the few times where it didn't work, legitimately due to some bad luck. Like, he got a soft grounder and it snuck through. But that doesn't justify the process. Like, process-wise, this is still bad. You are putting a guy repeatedly into what may be the worst position for him, like the least likely position in which he's going to succeed. And he did it again here. And this just can't keep happening, man. Like, it's not a good way to manage Elvis specifically, or just the bullpen in this situation. And you had other guys we could have gone to here as well.
Yeah, okay. So here's the thing, right? When I'm playing NCAA 25 on the PlayStation, when I'm in the red zone, I know that I should stop running stick. Yet, in my mind, what do I do every time I'm at like this 5-yard line and it's third and goal? My mind just defaults. It freezes and I hit stick. That's the route concept we're running. It never works for me. Even if like that curls open, it gets tackled short of the goal line. I'll throw a pick on the slant because I won't read a dropping linebacker or a crashing safety on like a cover 2 invert. And yet I still do it. That's Elvis Peguero right now in these situations. It worked last year. I mean, like, theoretically, his stuff should be great against righties.
It should be.
He should also get more swing and miss.
Well, here's the thing is he does get swing and miss, but his command and his sequencing are so bad that, like, the plate appearances never end in a strikeout.
Yeah. He can get ahead of the guy 0-2, and I'm still like, I don't know about this. Like, he can get 2 whiffs, and I'm still not sure. This was his fourth outing with inherited runners in the second half of this season. Each one has been in a tie game or with the Brewers up by 1. Each time he has failed to get an out before giving up the lead or the tie. Yet there he still was running out there, in that spot. I just don't think that's the best use of him. Like, he's been fine if you look at the overall numbers in terms of run prevention in the last month or so, but all of the good is coming in clean innings, or he gets the start of it. Like, I don't know what it is about that, and that's probably not like a actual transferable skill. Like, being bad to the first hitter you face, I wouldn't project that long term, but it's certainly a real thing right now, and it would impact my decision if I was deciding who's coming into a game. So, like, again, I don't know if I'm with you. I don't know. I wasn't sure Tobias Myers should have still been in that game. Even in the sixth, he was giving up hard contact, and it was finally like that last line drive to third. Who hit that for the second out of that inning? It was a righty,
Yeah, it
maybe
would have been that spot.
Pages, I think.
Yeah, I
It
think it
was like
was.
Murph saw that and was like, "Oh yeah, no, that's enough. Now we got to get
Yeah.
the other righty in there." Like,
But, like, that as opposed to the 3 other line drives he
you
allowed
could
in
have
the last
just,
20 minutes before that,
yeah,
like
I would have felt better. I mean, because even think about this, even after Elvis gives up that hit, now he's got Shohei to
yeah.
deal with, and he got him out.
Mhm.
But I would have felt better trying to see if Tobias Myers can just grind through that last hitter. Kind of just like what he does is find a way to get outs sometimes, and then go to Brian Hudson, or you go to Brian Hudson earlier. Like, there were a lot of options here. Yeah, it was something.
And the thing too, like, with Hudson, so Hudson ended up pitching the fo so Elvis came back out to face another righty to start the 7th. He gives up the hit to Teoscar Hernandez, and then he gets pulled.
It was
Elvis got
clear at that point he was just he was
yes.
there to get righties out, which he's not
Right, he's
done.
got the reverse
He has
splits, and
not done. The la
I do think there's
he
a
picked
reason
up the
for it
loss
too.
in, was it Colorado or maybe LA? Maybe not a loss, but he had a bad inning there, something in a big spot, and it was giving up a bunch of hits to righties. Like, this has just happened all season with him for a large part. So, yeah, I don't know if he's like that's what he's best at right now.
Yeah, it's and I think the reverse split thing for him is real too because I think it's just generally easier for him to get away, especially against lefties, like, even mistake pitches, if he's throwing the slider, like, that gyro slider is tough for a lefty to hit. And we've seen outings where like, I go back to his outing against the Nationals where he was facing a string of lefties and Eric Haas was catching, and he just kept calling slider, 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 and they couldn't touch it. Like, that's a very tough pitch for a left-handed hitter to get to, that hard gyro slider at, like, 92, as opposed to if he makes a mistake with that or makes a mistake with the sinker to a righty, like, they've shown that they can hit it. I don't think that's a fluke. I think that's just a product of the way he throws the ball, and he's just because those command issues and those issues with the splits and just putting guys on base, like, he needs to start clean innings because when he's starting a clean inning, he's got the opportunity to put a guy or 2 on, and then he can roll a double play ball. He still has a really high ground ball rate. It's over 50%. Then he can roll his double play ball. He gets out of the inning unscathed personally, but if he's already entering with guys on, he doesn't have that room to work with, and he needs that room.
And I mean, the hit that Hernandez had against him was an opposite field, like, pretty lightly hit single, but it was on a sinker right down the middle. And a good hitter is going to find grass with that. Like, it was just not a good pitch,
Yeah.
and that's ultimately what matters.
Yeah. If I'm looking at this spot, like, if you wanna designate a guy for this spot, like, Nick Mears is probably the best that you have right now, especially because like, you can get a K there to a right-handed batter. That's really what you're looking for. I think Nick Mears is the guy for that spot. Nick Mears pitched in garbage time the night before, though, so he didn't get a chance to throw in this one, but, obviously, things didn't go well for Elvis there, and then because of that, now Brian Hudson's throwing 2 innings in a game when the Brewers are down. Granted, it worked because they ended up coming back in this one, which we'll get to in, like, a minute here, but if they what happens if they lose that game now? Like, you've made a bad decision there with putting Elvis in a spot where he's highly unlikely to get the job done, and then you've burned one of your best relievers in a game where you're down or in a game you lost. Like, the pitching management was not great in this one. Fortunately, everything worked out, but, like, this is one of those things where process-wise, you don't want to see this continue because eventually it is going to bite the Brewers if this is how Murphy continues to operate with a couple of these guys, specifically with the way that he seems to view Peguero's role in this bullpen.
I think like to have a devil's advocate line would be to say, okay, once this actually starts mattering, who's in the bullpen? It's a lot better options. And in the playoffs, you got a lot more availability, and you're not worried about back to backs and three in a rows, and you got days off. So we're not there yet, but we're close to the bullpen. You look at it and you're like, oh, that's a bunch of dudes right there, and that's not it right now. Joe Ross just pitched high leverage on Sunday. Elvis Peguero is still in a spot where he's like tantalizing them to use him in these spots, and best case scenario, he's not even considered.
We'll see how everything shakes out, but you are right. The bullpen picture is probably going to change here once we get into some of those bigger spots. We'll kind of talk about how the Brewers ended up coming back in this one, though, and making at least some elements of this debate moot, at least for this game. So the Brewers putting together a 3-run eighth inning against Dodgers reliever Daniel Hudson. Jackson Churio led off with a double, so a multi-extra base hit game for him. That was his third of the season. So Churio doubles, Garrett Mitchell draws a walk, and then Contreras coming through with an infield single that was deflected by Daniel Hudson. Willie Adames then hitting a single, and then Rhys Hoskins hitting another ground ball that deflected off Daniel Hudson to plate the next run as part of that comeback, that sixth and final run for the Brewers. So they would end up winning this one 6-4. Devin Williams picking up another save. Once again, a repeat matchup against Betts and Ohtani for him. This one might have somehow been even more impressive. Like these two at bats specifically, strikes out Betts, strikes out Ohtani. That Ohtani at bat was a really, really good one. I don't know if you had a chance to watch it, but he fell behind, battled back in the counts. The first changeup that Ohtani sees after seeing so he sees a fastball that he fouls off because he's a little bit late, fouls it off to left. Changeup on the next pitch, a little bit out in front, still gets a bat on it though and fouls it off to right. So the fact that he was able to even cover those two pitches was really impressive to me. And then Devin just perfectly executes a fastball and blows it by him at the top of the zone. That was a really, really cinematic at bat to close out what ended up being a very eventful series for Milwaukee, ending this one on a high note. But more impressive work from Devin Williams to close this one out. Did you see that final inning?
I did. My kid was running absolutely wild from like the eighth to the ninth, so I was like very sporadically had it up in the background, but caught I think the last pitch of the Betts at bat, and then I watched it all back. But yeah, that Ohtani at bat, it's just too bad it wasn't a 1-run game because that would have been just fantastic cinema. But I also love like him not giving into Ohtani there. Uh, don't want to put that run on, even if kind of like the natural inclination for most pitchers in every other spot would be, yeah, I'm not going to give in to him here, but that's not how Devin Williams operates. He was not under any circumstances trying to walk Shohei Ohtani. Like probably would have rather given up a home run than put him on base. So awesome stuff from Devin Williams. Like the stuff too was awesome. He looks there's a like the Vila was really good early in his first outing, but I still had like a couple of concerns through his first three about the command and like spotting the changeup specifically, and those are kind of gone away. Like I've seen enough. Devin Williams looks locked in completely.
I think the timeline kind of lines up on that because he essentially needed to have what was a second spring training, but that rehab assignment was shortened because they wanted to get him back to the big league sooner. So like 2-3 outings before all of a sudden everything seems like it's fully back. Like that timeline seems about right to me, just in terms of getting him back to that form. But good finish to the Brewers for this series. Probably still make the case that even in these last two games they didn't play good baseball. But sometimes you just got to take what's given to you and just move on and don't look back. You're going to need wins like that throughout the season. So if you want to be super nitpicky and super objective, I wouldn't say it was a great series for the Brewers, but again, you take those two on to the next. Before we get into the next, we're going to just wrap up a couple of loose ends here. We'll take a couple more listener questions. We have a topic that I know Kurt likes to talk about. Steve asked us about some lineup construction stuff. He says, "We know you can't just replace Christian Yelich. What do you make of the Brewers lineup since his injury and how they've tried to paper over his absence?" So do you have any comments on lineup construction since Christian Yelich went down?
Hmm. I don't really care about lineups, and yet I found myself caring in like the last week. So this is not healthy for me. I need to stop caring. But at some point, I would hit Reese Hoskins higher. I would care a little less about having this everyone spaced out all the time. Garrett Mitchell third today was an interesting one. The reverse splits against Kershaw, who didn't have reverse splits, was an interesting one.
That
Um,
was an interesting one.
Ultimately, it probably doesn't matter a ton. Like Bryce Terang at leadoff, he needs to hit, which he looked much better the last 2 days, to make that operation go. But when he's hitting, it works. So yeah, not too many thoughts other than this week had some interesting decisions, I think.
Yeah, I really don't care a whole lot, so I don't really have a whole lot to say about that. There's no good way to replace Christian Yelich, kind of like Steve asked in his question here, like he said in his question. So it's yeah, I don't care a lot. The only lineup I had a problem with was Pat Murphy claiming that Clayton Kershaw had reverse splits when he has never had reverse splits, or unless there was one-off season mixed in there where he did. He doesn't have them this year. He didn't have them going into that start, which is also going into that outing was a sample size of 3 starts, totaling less than 20 innings, so that doesn't really matter anyway. Not quite sure what happened with that, but other than that, I just don't care a whole lot, so I don't have a whole lot to add on that question. Tyler asks us something about the rest of the NL Central. He asks, "Are the Cubs now the biggest threat in the division with their semi-hotness and soft schedule the rest of the way?" I'll answer this one first because my answer is pretty quick. I don't care. Is there a threat in this division? The Brewers
No,
have a 9-game lead. Like, not
no,
even
there is
even
no.
even put
This would
aside
be a
put aside the
cata
9-game lead. Yeah,
this would be
there's
a
no
cataclysmic collapse by the
yes.
Brewers. This is I'm not gonna say it's wrapped because I'm not gonna do that. But there is no threat to the Brewers in this division.
That's what I keep going back to is there are no, like, really good teams right now in this division outside of the Brewers. Like, you can talk about just the 9-game lead that obviously helps, like, teams are gonna have to make up a lot of ground. But, like, people are talking about what the Brewers need to do the rest of the way to win this division. Don't overlook just the general sea of mediocrity that is the rest of the NL Central. Like, the Cardinals already got hot earlier this year. I don't think they're getting hot again, so they don't worry
Yeah.
me a whole
So
lot.
the Brewers got what? Brewers have what, 40 games left? They go 20 and
Yeah,
20.
roughly. Mhm.
Then the
Like,
Cardinals or the Cubs, who both lost the season series, or the Reds, who lost the season series,
yeah.
would have to go like 30 and 10. Okay,
It's not
sure.
happening. It's not happening. Like, if you're the Brewers, all you need to do the rest of the way is just not, I don't know, don't lose 10 in a row. Like, that's what you need to do to win the division. Just don't have, like, a 10-game losing streak at any point, and the Brewers are the only team left in baseball that's never lost more than 3 games in a row. Like, they're I don't wanna say it's a slam dunk because, crazier things have happened, but the odds of any other team becoming a threat to them or being a threat to them is so exceptionally low right now. Like, I'm not even gonna make a case for one team over the other because they all just kinda fall into the same bucket for me. Like, you're probably gonna see some shuffling of the deck chairs in the rest of the standings, but the top of the standings are not gonna change, I don't think. Like, the Brewers are I they're going to win the division. I think they're going to win the division, and that's not a bold prediction on my part. If something catastrophic happens, people can come back to me and start screaming at me for saying that. We had the jinx discussion a few minutes ago, but yeah, there's no huge threat to them in this division. So it's not the Cubs, it's also not anybody else. So if you want to say that the Cubs will have a better season the rest of the way than the Cardinals or the Reds or the Pirates, maybe they will. I don't know, but that doesn't make them a threat in my mind. Is probably the best way to put that. Um, so yeah, that's the way it's going to go. I don't see anyone as a huge threat. The final question that we'll take comes from Patrick. He talks about how the Brewers have a potential roster crunch coming the rest of the way, just with trying to figure out how you're going to shuffle this pitching staff, figuring out how you're going to line up the 26-man and then the 40-man roster. Rosters do expand on September 1st to 28th, so he asks us for our ideal 14 pitcher picture on September 1st. Kurt, do you want to go first so that I can reach behind my back and grab my notebook that has my 14 on it?
Sure. I was gonna say you should go first because I'll mix it up and it'll be interesting. But I'll go first. I'll go first.
Okay.
Um, it was actually not as hard as I thought it was gonna be. But I kind of just went with like the guys that I want. There's a few strategies you could look at it given their standing in the division right now. I'm gonna go Colin Ray, Freddie Peralta, Tobias Myers, Frankie Montas. I stuck with Aaron Savali. Was not guaranteeing him a spot, but I stuck with it. You need to just, like I said, get to the finish line. I'm not sure
Innings.
moving him in any capacity and then throwing like DL Hall in there is a great idea at this point. But DL Hall's in there too. Devin Williams, you'll be surprised to hear. UL Piamps, Brian Hudson, Trevor McGill, Nick Mears, Jared Koenig, and then the two. If you listen to Microbrew, you know who I'm going here. It's Jacob Mizorowski and Craig Yoho. Did you see what Mizorowski did as of the night of recording this, Jack?
I did not see that. I
2 innings.
last I saw he was coming into the game.
2 innings, no hits. I don't know if he walked anyone. Bunch of strikeouts. It's gonna happen. I think it's gonna happen. Like
That's
this,
your
they
prediction?
clearly want it to happen. They wanted it to happen last year, but he really would have had to exceed expectations. But they want it to happen this year, and he's shoving down there. So why not? And then Craig Yoho, I think you could probably honestly wait a little bit with him. Like, I don't know if this makes sense, but the thought in my mind is like, what if you don't overexpose him to big league hitters? Like his stuff is so nasty and so unique that what if you kind of just throw him out there and you're like, yeah, none of you have seen him before. Yeah, you don't got anything on this guy. Good luck. So maybe you could wait on a little on him, but I don't want to wait. I want to see that change up in the big leagues.
Okay, my list looks a little bit different. Mainly, it just doesn't have the two young bucks on there. So I got Freddie, Colin Ray, Montas, Tobias, Savali. I put DL Hall on there in place of, I don't have Piguero on this list. So DL Hall, Devin Williams, McGill, Piamps, Hudson, Koenig, Mears. I still have Bryce Wilson and Joe Ross on here. And the caveat that I'll throw in here is this is September 1st, not September 21st or middle of September. I think that you need to hang on to these length guys, like these MLB length guys, as long as you can, just in light of everything that's happened to your pitching depth this year. Like you need to try to retain those guys for as long as you can. But if you get to a point where you got a couple weeks left in the season and you like someone like Mizorowski better in your potential playoff bullpen than someone like Joe Ross,
Which you do.
you do. So if you get to the last 2 weeks of the season and now you're like, okay, now this is what we're looking ahead to. The division is basically sewn up. Everybody's healthy, or everyone who is healthy right now is still healthy, is maybe the best way to put that. Now maybe you're comfortable cutting bait with Joe Ross, and bam, you get Miz on the roster, and you kind of spend those last 2 weeks of the year getting him the big league exposure with the hope that he's going to be in your playoff bullpen. I think that's a way that you could play that. I just don't know if you're going to cut Bryce Wilson and or Joe Ross, mainly Joe Ross, because Bryce has a little bit better of a track record with this team. I don't know if you're cutting Joe Ross by September 1st, just because I think you're going to want to retain that depth for as long as you can. So if you were to ask me my
I don't think
ideal,
they're going to,
no,
but
and
I want to have
I would
fun.
I would agree with them too on that though, which is why that's why I'm keeping him on there. If you were to ask me for my ideal roster picture midway through September for the pitching staff, then it starts to change. But September 1st, I'm largely sticking with the status quo because you do still have a little bit of time built in left to shake some things up if that's what you want to do a couple weeks before the playoffs. So that's why I'm playing it that way. But
I
apparently I'm
will
not
say
as
I will add to the Mizorowski thing. I legitimately, it's not just like, oh, it'll be fun. I legitimately do think you want to give him some runway in the major leagues to just figure out some of the command stuff. Like when he comes up to levels, usually his command is a little shaky. Like his first outing at Nashville was shaky. In the command early on in Biloxi this year and last year too. I think in Carolina, his first few starts, like this is kind of, it just takes a little bit. And you want to get him feeling as good as possible and, as much time to figure things out up here. Like, what does he have to do at the big league level? Actually, what he has to do is command the ball. So that's about it with him.
Mhm.
I just think like runway with him would be a good thing rather than like, and also you kind of get an idea of what you have instead of if you have 2 bad weeks, you're not going to rely on him. But if you have 2 bad weeks followed by 2 electric weeks, then he's got a chance to do something in the playoffs.
Okay, so you would rather he get the month instead of a couple weeks, basically, is
Yeah, I
kinda what
don't
you're
think
saying.
like a
Okay.
guy like Yoho needs as much time
Mhm.
because there's not the command question with him. Um, it's I would like to give Mizrowski some time.
Yeah, the command thing, though, like, that's the one thing that makes me wonder, like, but could it be Yoho before Miz? And I don't know, they could go either way with this, but they have some interesting decisions to make about depth and floor versus ceiling with how they wanna construct this bullpen. They got a lot of different things they could do on that front, so we'll see what the Brewers end up doing once they get to September 1st. We'll wrap up really quickly and get Kurt out of here by wrapping up or not wrapping up, previewing the Guardians series. That's going to be a 3-game weekend set to wrap up this homestand. Aaron Savali is going to get the start on game 1 on Friday night. He'll be pitching opposite Gavin Williams. That's a 7:10 first pitch. Freddie Peralta in game 2 opposite Tanner Bybee. That's a 6:10. And then the day game to wrap it up, Colin Ray is going to look to bounce back against Ben Lively. That's going to be a 1:10. Do we have a prediction for what's going to happen in this series, Kurt?
I don't know what my prediction is, but I am interested to see the Guardians because they're kind of like it feels a little bit like a smoke and mirrors team with them. Like their starting pitching's not very good. They got a couple guys that we'll see in this series at the top of it that have been pretty solid, but their bullpen is like ludicrous. Clase, Cade Smith, Hunter Gaddis, Tim Herron. I don't even know who that is. But these dudes are like have been untouchable this year. So that's gonna make them really fun in a playoff series, kind of just like throwing out random guys and they're probably gonna shove. Um, Bullpen sustainability year over year, very questionable. But they've got it right now, and that's gonna have to be their meal ticket. So hopefully, just from like a baseball enjoyment standpoint, I would love to see Clase at some point this week. He's been stupid good, 0.64 ERA in 56 innings, 37 saves. Like,
That's
holy smokes, this is
that's like some 2015 Zach Britton stuff.
yeah.
Or was it
We have not
16
seen many seasons
the
like
year he
this.
had the yeah.
So, two good teams going at it. I don't know how it's going to go, but some fun arms to watch.
We'll find out. Could be a potential battle of the bullpens in that series. Spencer McKay, will be back next week with me to recap all of that action after that's all gone down. So we'll have that for you next Friday. But Kurt, thank you so much for stopping by for this week and filling Spencer's shoes. Big shoes to fill. You did a pretty good job. You didn't have a minor league sandbox segment like Spencer did. We probably could have worked one in because I know you're a little bit of a minor league enthusiast as well. So unless you have any
Jesus Mate. Does that
there
count?
we go. Okay, that
Yeah,
was the
we
minor
did
league
it. We
sandbox.
talked Miz, but
Yeah,
Jesus Mate.
okay. Yeah, Jesus Mate. If you haven't checked out Kylie McDaniel's midseason prospect ranking, some good stuff on Jesus Mate in there. Definitely a name that people should probably be paying attention to moving forward if you haven't yet. But once again, Kurt, thanks for joining the show this week. Thank you to everybody who listened this week. As a reminder, you can follow the podcast at BF_pod on Twitter. You can follow me at by Jack Stern. You can follow Kurt at by Kurt Hogue. Read all of his work at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Listen to the Microbrew podcast, this, that, and the other. Thank you all for tuning in this week, and we will be back with you under the standard format at the same time next week. Until then, go Brewers.